Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unpacking an incredible historical account from the Battle of the Trench, a story of survival, absolute faith, and an event that completely defies physical logic. To really grasp what happened here, we need to anchor ourselves in a moment where the odds were impossibly high. We're going to see exactly how extreme physical deprivation set the stage for an undeniable, totally mind-blowing display of supernatural abundance.
So picture this. Arabia is in the absolute grip of a severe drought and famine, and the Muslims defending Medina are trying to survive on, well, basically nothing. The starvation is so sheer, so visceral, that the companions are actually tying heavy stones tightly around their stomachs. Why? Just to create a fake sense of fullness and push through the agonizing pain. Desperate and exhausted, a group of them go to the Prophet Muhammad to show him their suffering. But when the Prophet unties the cloth around his own stomach, they are stunned into absolute silence, because not one stone, but two fell to the ground.
And to really understand the pressure cooker they were in, you have to look at what was waiting right outside the city. A massive, heavily armed coalition, 10,000 vengeful warriors from various tribes, had just gathered on the outskirts of Medina. So the Muslims aren't just starving, they are staring down in overwhelming force that is practically burning with a desire for complete annihilation.
Under this terrifying threat of total destruction, the Muslims are forced into a desperate race against time. They literally have less than 10 days to pull off an unprecedented defensive strategy, digging an impossible 6-kilometer-long trench. And listen, they aren't digging in soft, easy soil. They are hacking through solid volcanic rock and harsh desert terrain from dawn until dusk. No rest, no proper tools, and most importantly, no food.
Now, what this brilliantly illustrates is the horrific famine they were battling, but also a profound lesson in leadership. The Prophet isn't sitting comfortably in a tent directing traffic. He's down in the trench with a pick and shovel, covered in dust, working harder than anyone else. While the digging companions are starving to the point of tying one stone to their bodies, their leader is quietly enduring double that agony, 2 stones worth of starvation.
Seeing the Prophet so dangerously weakened by hunger, well, that acts as the catalyst for our story. It completely breaks the heart of a companion named Jabir ibn Abdullah. He just can't bear to see his leader in this condition. Knowing anyone else would have already collapsed, Jabir quietly slips away from the digging and rushes home to his wife, absolutely desperate to find any scrap of food they could use to feed him.
Jabir gets home, asks his wife what they have, and her response is, well, heartbreakingly sparse. What you see here is literally their entire inventory: 1 small goat and a few handfuls of barley. That is it. Barely enough to feed a tiny fraction of a starving army, right? Maybe just 2 or 3 men. But Jabir slaughters the little goat, his wife grinds the barley into flour, and they get a small pot of meat cooking in their clay oven. As Jabir turns to leave and fetch the Prophet, you see this deeply human moment of panic set in for his wife. She practically begs him, please don't put me in a difficult position before the messenger. And you totally get it, right? She's terrified of the humiliation. The thought of the Prophet showing up with a large group of men only to find they barely have a few scraps to offer, it's a nightmare for a host. So she urges him to keep the invitation incredibly, incredibly small.
So, trying to carefully manage the situation and honor his wife's very logical request, Jabir heads back to the trench. He quietly approaches the Prophet, pulls him aside, and whispers that they've prepared just a little bit of food. He politely asks him to come by the house and to just bring a few companions with him. Jabir probably thinks, okay, phew, I've got this completely under control.
But the narrative tension spikes instantly here, because the Prophet doesn't whisper back. Instead, he turns around, raises his voice, and joyfully calls out to the entire exhausted army digging that trench. He shouts, "Your brother is inviting us to a meal." Literally, every single man drops their shovel. The exact scenario Jabir's wife was so terrified of is now happening, but on a scale they couldn't possibly have imagined. I really want you to put yourself in Jabir's shoes for a second and just consider the absolute, logical, mathematical impossibility of what's about to happen. You have a tiny pot of meat, a few pieces of bread, and marching towards your front door is an entire army of desperate, starving men who have been doing back-breaking labor for days. Jabir rushes home ahead of the massive crowd, overwhelmed, panicked, to deliver this terrifying news to his wife.
So Jabir bursts through the door, expecting an absolute disaster. But here's the crucial pivot. Instead of breaking down, his wife asks him one very specific question. "Did the Prophet ask you how much food we had?" Jabir says yes. Her response? "Then it will be fine." Wow. The moment she realizes the Prophet knows their exact inventory, she instantly trusts a spiritual reality over their physical lack. She knows he must know something they don't.
When the Prophet arrives, he immediately takes charge, and this breaks down the supernatural event into methodical, observable actions. First, he makes a dua, a supplication for Barakah, meaning divine blessing or increase, over the meat and the bread. He then brings total order to the starving crowd, calling the men inside in small groups of 10. Finally, he takes the bread from the oven with his own hands, places a piece of meat on top, and personally serves it to every single companion, directly channeling this immense blessing. Group after group enters that small house. 10 men, then 20, then 100. Just imagine the scale of that. Against all known laws of nature and physics, 1,000 physically exhausted and starving men ate from that single, tiny goat and those few handfuls of barley. And we aren't talking about a tiny, polite bite here. The historical sources note that they ate until they were completely and entirely full.
And the crazy part? It doesn't even end there. Jabir's first-hand testimony confirms this ongoing supernatural supply. He reported that after all 1,000 men had eaten their fill and cleared out, he and his wife looked at their food. It didn't just stretch to accommodate the men, it literally did not decrease at all. The pot was still boiling full of meat, and bread was still being made from the dough, appearing exactly as it had before a single person had taken a bite. So this leaves us with a fascinating and stark contrast. On one side, you have the brutal physical reality of the Battle of the Trench, the exhaustion, the harsh drought, a 10,000-man army at the gates, and just a few handfuls of grain. On the flip side, you have spiritual sustenance. It completely showcases the transformative power of absolute faith, like that immediate trust shown by Jabir's wife, and the concept of infinite barakah, where divine blessing literally overrides physical limitations. To wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. This wasn't some trick witnessed by one or two people in a dark room. It was experienced firsthand by 1,000 hungry men who chewed and swallowed the food themselves. Men known historically to have devoted their entire lives to truth and integrity. So how could 1,000 people agree upon and repeatedly recount a miracle of this magnitude if they hadn't tasted it with their own senses? It's an undeniable historical reality that absolutely challenges us to look beyond the physical world. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep exploring.